The high cost of accommodation in the US will soon make about 44 million Americans homeless. This figure represents approximately 1 out of every 7 people struggling with shelter-related challenges that are just beginning to get worse. What more can be responsible for this if not the COVID-19 pandemic, which has not just led to firms cutting down on staff, but a cash crunch and plummeting standards of living across the board? The unasked question on every mind is what Joe Biden and the US government is doing about it. Many Americans will continue living in this dire situation, skeptical of a place to call theirs, despite government efforts to assist. This isn't a dystopian nightmare they can wake up and shake off anytime soon. It's the stark reality aimed to stare them into a fatal surrender. We cannot categorically state that a single cause is responsible for this crisis, as many factors have come into focus. Research by Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies and Moody's Analytics attribute this rising dystopia to the cost of a mortgage, which has led to a surge in apartment demands and skyrocketed rental fees, thus leaving the lower strata short of rental power. Sometimes the difference between a high mortgage and bankruptcy is income status. People would normally be able to pay for whatever increment in housing fees if there is a proportional increase in income level. In addition to the uneven distribution of economic wealth, this has left regular renters stuck in low-yield neighborhoods, especially those in multi-color communities, more susceptible to financial breakdown. Given this analysis, you don't have to be a finance expert to know that Fed's increase in interest rates has made it extremely expensive to access mortgage loans from financial institutions. Do the maths. Big interest to buy money for rental costs means big per monthly repayments on interest. Due to this, intending homebuyers saw themselves outdone by the property market, leaving them scurrying to rent apartments, thus leading to a multiplier effect on rental fees. The United States, as we know, is a multi-occupied territory with so many other factors leading to the surge in a housing crisis. Part of the major reason is that apartments and houses no longer pass as just homes, but as real estate investments. Influencer individuals regularly purchase these properties as investments, pushing prices up and making it challenging for working-class homes to afford shelter. Laws concerning zoning play an accompanying role too in the issue. This means that several cities have laws binding on zoning, making it a huddle to erect inexpensive houses in most areas. This has brought about a shortage of low-budget housing options, thus further skyrocketing prices. Economic disruptions in the US brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic have indirectly led to significant dips in the standard of living, directly occasioned by job losses and financial hardships, especially for the working class. Consequently, those just thriving become easy targets in the onslaught, finding themselves in a financial fix too tight to afford rent. The US government instituted some form of relief not so recently, such as eviction moratoriums and financial assistance, to alleviate most of the hurdles renters face. However, these are often ad hoc, quick fixes, often temporary and barely enough to mitigate against the pangs of the crisis. Also, the pandemic has dealt a multi-level blow on Americans, with job losses and financial hardships on the one hand, and a rise in demand for rental properties on the other, driving up prices across the board. With many people unable to afford rent, eviction rates began to climb. Coming as an aftermath of the pandemic was inflation, which has also led to the housing crisis. Inflation happens when the market price level of products and services in the economy surges over a short space of time. This results in the cost of living increasing concomitantly, placing a ransom on food for families who can barely afford a decent shelter. Tenants in the United States face extraordinary hardships as rent costs rise. Renters are finding it increasingly difficult to locate affordable accommodation as mortgage rates rise and demand for rental properties reaches an all-time high. According to recent Realtor.com data, less than 6% of rental properties across the country are empty, and rent prices remain at historic highs despite recent dips in some places. According to recent Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Research and Moody's Analytics data, rising mortgage rates have pushed many people out of home ownership, increasing apartment demand and sky-high rental costs. The gap between rent and income growth has expanded, putting tenants in financial jeopardy as salary growth lags behind rent rise. This, combined with significant wealth disparities, implies that tenants in communities of color and in high poverty, lower income and lower rent neighborhoods are more likely to face financial hardship. Rising rent prices disproportionately affect low-income earners, who must spend much of their income on housing. According to the National Housing Coalition, low-income workers must spend approximately 55% of their salary on rent for a one-bedroom rental, leaving little cash for other basics such as food and transportation. Even middle-class households need help to keep up with rent increases, with many paying more than 40% of their income on rent. The looming danger of eviction exacerbates the poor situation for tenants in the United States. Notwithstanding various anti-eviction policies implemented during the pandemic, eviction filings have already returned to pre-pandemic levels in several places, putting many renters at risk of losing their homes. A shortage of affordable housing, stagnant wage growth, and a lack of federal and state aid for landlords and low-income tenants have combined to produce a perfect storm, leaving many renters in financial jeopardy. While the housing problem in the United States is complicated, there are potential solutions that could assist renters in reducing some of the stress. The White House has produced a framework for a renter's Bill of Rights, which includes provisions for safe, quality, accessible, and affordable housing, clear and fair leases, renter education and rights enforcement, the right to organize, and eviction prevention, diversion, and relief. In addition, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has set aside $20 million for its Eviction Protection Grant Program, which will finance NGOs and government agencies that provide legal help to low-income renters facing eviction. HUD is also considering forcing certain rental property owners to give at least 30 days' notice if they intend to terminate a tenant's lease due to non-payment of rent. Municipal and state governments can also help to address the housing crisis by enacting rent control rules or providing tax breaks to developers who build affordable homes. Charitable groups can also help renters facing eviction by providing inexpensive housing solutions and legal representation. Nevertheless, a quick way out of this crisis seems improbable, with a nation divided along political lines and the worst living conditions in decades. To address the housing issue in the United States, a multidimensional solution involving government policy, private sector action, and community involvement will be required. Without real remedies, the rental affordability crisis will continue to imperil millions of Americans while exacerbating the already grave housing insecurity and homelessness. We want your ideas and thoughts on the issue. Kindly drop them in the comments section if you have any. Please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel for more interesting stuff if you found this useful.